I didn't know anything was wrong when I boarded the plane. My phone was already in airplane mode before I even buckled my seatbelt. It was an early flight, one of those rushed, half-awake mornings where you're just trying to get from point A to point B without thinking too much. I remember leaning my head back against the seat and closing my eyes, relieved to finally disconnect. For the first time in weeks, no messages, no calls, no family drama, just silence. I didn't know that while I was somewhere over 30,000 feet in the air, everything was falling apart on the ground. When we landed, people stood up immediately, reaching for bags, phones lighting up one by one. I stayed seated for a moment, stretching, completely unaware that my life had already taken a sharp turn. Then I turned my phone off airplane mode. It vibrated once, twice. Then it started buzzing nonstop. I looked down and froze. 105 missed calls. The screen was full, so full I had to scroll. My mother-in-law, my sister-in-law, unknown numbers, repeated calls from the same contacts stacked on top of each other like something out of a nightmare. Below them, the messages started loading. Call me now. Where are you? This is serious. Answer your phone. They're here. The police are here. Please call me back. My stomach dropped. I stood up so fast I almost knocked into the man in the aisle. My hands were shaking as I scrolled, trying to make sense of the chaos, my mind racing through possibilities that didn't connect to anything logical. Police? Here. Where? I stepped out of the plane and moved to the side of the terminal, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I tapped my mother-in-law's name. It rang once, twice. She answered on the third ring. Her voice was not calm. "Where have you been?" she cried. "Why weren't you answering?" "I was on a plane," I said. "What's going on?" She didn't answer right away. I could hear noise on her end. Voices, echoes, someone crying in the background. Then she said it. "They took her." My grip tightened around the phone. "Took who?" "Your sister-in-law," she said, her voice breaking. "They put her in the back of a police car." The airport seemed to tilt. "What do you mean they took her?" I asked slowly. "Why were the police there?" "You need to come back," she said urgently. "You need to fix this." Fix this? I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. Fix what? I asked. She inhaled sharply. "The house." The word hit me like ice water. "The house?" I repeated. "Yes, your house. There's been a misunderstanding." A misunderstanding? I closed my eyes. "When I left," I said carefully, "no one was supposed to be at that house." She didn't respond. That silence told me everything. "I don't understand. Why was she there?" "She thought," my mother-in-law began, then stopped herself. "It doesn't matter what she thought. What matters is that the new owner showed up." My heart skipped. "The new... what?" Another pause. "He came early, without warning, and she was inside, and he called the police." New owner. I opened my eyes slowly, staring straight ahead as the pieces began to collide in my head. "You told her she could be there." "No," she snapped. "I told her she had access." Access? I almost laughed. "You gave her the keys," I said. "She's family," my mother-in-law replied. "I didn't think—" "No," I cut in. "You didn't ask." Her breathing was uneven now. "You didn't tell me you sold it." I felt something cold and steady settle in my chest. "I didn't need to," I said. On the other end of the line, my sister-in-law started screaming. I could hear it clearly now. Panicked, high-pitched, furious. "She's saying they can't do this," my mother-in-law said. "She says it's her house." I closed my eyes again. "She's saying what?" I asked. "That she lives there. that she has permission, that we're family. Family. Did she refuse to leave? I asked. Yes, she whispered. Did she argue with the police? Another pause. Yes. Did she tell them she was the owner? Silence. That was all the confirmation I needed. They handcuffed her, my mother-in-law said softly. People were watching. I pictured it instantly. Neighbors, strangers, a police car parked in front of what used to be my home. My sister-in-law, shocked, indignant, sitting in the back seat, finally realizing she had crossed a line she couldn't talk her way out of. When I boarded that plane, I said quietly, she thought she was spending the night in my house. My mother-in-law started crying. When I landed, I continued, my voice steady, she was already in a police car. This didn't have to happen, she sobbed. If you'd just told us. If you'd just asked, I corrected. I looked down at my phone again. 105 missed calls. All of them made after it was already too late. You need to come back again, she said again. Please, we can still explain this. Explain it to who? The police? The new owner? Or the truth you were finally losing control of? I'm still at the airport, I said. Good, she replied quickly. Come straight here. I hesitated. Then I said the words she wasn't expecting. No. There was a sharp inhale on the other end. What do you mean, no? I mean, I said calmly, I'm not fixing this. Silence. You gave someone keys to a house you didn't own. You let her walk into a place that wasn't hers. And now reality caught up. You're being cruel, she whispered. No, I said. I'm being accurate. I hung up before she could respond. As I stood there in the terminal, surrounded by people rushing to their own destinations, one thought repeated in my mind. She thought she still controlled the house. She thought she controlled access. She thought she controlled me. And now, for the first time, none of that was true. What she didn't know yet, what no one knew yet, was that this was only the beginning. Because the keys weren't the real betrayal, and the arrest wasn't the real humiliation. That part was still coming. Hit subscribe and share your story in the comments below. Yours could be next. Before anyone stepped inside my house without permission, something else happened first. They made me doubt myself. Not all at once, not loudly, slowly, politely, in ways that sounded reasonable if you didn't listen too closely. It started months before that phone call in the airport. At first, it was small things. Comments that didn't sound like accusations, but felt like corrections. You're very particular about your space, my mother-in-law said once, smiling, after I mentioned that I preferred people to call before stopping by. Particular. Not clear, not reasonable. Particular. Another time, when I asked why my sister-in-law had been inside the house while I was at work, my mother-in-law laughed lightly. Oh, she just needed to grab something. You're not upset about that, are you? The question wasn't neutral. It already contained the answer she wanted. I hesitated, and that hesitation became proof. I just didn't know she was coming, I said carefully. Well, now you do. Problem solved. Problem solved. That phrase came up a lot. Whenever something felt off, it was reframed as already resolved. Whenever I expressed discomfort, it was treated like an inconvenience. My sister-in-law played her part too. She had a way of making herself sound helpless while doing exactly what she wanted. I didn't know it would bother you, she'd say, already sitting on my couch. Mom said it was fine. I thought you'd understand. Always thought, never asked. Once, I came home and found her in my kitchen cooking. She didn't look surprised to see me. Oh, good, you're back. Can you watch this while I run out? Run out where? To do what?
With whose permission? I stood there, keys still in my hand, trying to decide if I was allowed to be confused in my own house. Later, when I brought it up to my husband, he sighed. "You know how my family is," he said. "They don't mean anything by it." That sentence did more damage than he realized, because it taught me something important. If I reacted, I was making it a thing. If I stayed quiet, it was handled. There was no version where my boundaries were simply respected, only versions where they were negotiated without me. The real shift happened the first time I said no. It was a Sunday. I remember because I had plans I'd mentioned more than once. That morning, my phone buzzed. My mother-in-law. "We're stopping by later," she said. Not asked, stated. "I'm actually not going to be home, and I'd prefer—" She interrupted me gently. "Oh, sweetheart, it's fine. We won't stay long." "I'm not comfortable with people being there when I'm not," I said, my voice tight. There was a pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "You're being a little dramatic," she said finally. Dramatic. That word landed differently, because suddenly this wasn't about access, it was about my temperament. I hung up feeling unsettled, but also guilty, as if I'd overreacted, as if I'd failed some invisible test of being easygoing. When I came home later that night, the lights were off. Nothing was missing, nothing was obviously wrong, and that made it worse, because now I had no proof. Just a feeling, and feelings, I was learning, were easy to dismiss. "You see," my husband said when I mentioned it, nothing happened. Nothing happened, except I felt smaller in my own home. After that, the language shifted. They stopped asking, they started assuming. "She'll understand. She won't mind. It's not a big deal." Every time I pushed back, I got the same response. "You're reading too much into this." I began to notice something unsettling. They never argued with me directly. They corrected me indirectly, through tone, through glances, through silence. If I spoke up at dinner, the conversation would stall. Someone would change the subject, someone would laugh awkwardly, and I would be left holding the discomfort. The worst part, I started editing myself before they ever had to. I stopped mentioning things that bothered me, stopped pointing out patterns, stopped trusting my own reactions. Because every time I did, someone reminded me, kindly, that I was being too sensitive. The word sensitive became a weapon. "She's just sensitive," my mother-in-law said once, right in front of me, after I asked why my sister-in-law still had a key. I looked at her, stunned. Sensitive? For wanting control over my own home? My sister-in-law smiled sympathetically, like I was a child who didn't understand how families worked. "Don't worry, we're not strangers." "No, you're worse. Strangers ask." What no one realized, what they couldn't see yet, was that something had started to harden inside me. Not anger, clarity. I began paying attention to who spoke for me, to who decided things on my behalf, to how often my consent was assumed instead of requested. And I noticed something else, too. Every boundary I didn't enforce became precedent. Every silence became permission. Every "it's fine" became evidence. They weren't just crossing lines, they were rewriting them. By the time my mother-in-law casually mentioned weeks later that she'd made an extra copy of the key just in case, I didn't argue. I just nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I finally understood the game. They thought my silence meant acceptance. They thought my calm meant control. They thought I was still negotiating. I wasn't. I was observing. Because when people spend that much time convincing you that nothing is happening, it's usually because something is. And when they insist you're overreacting, it's often because they're afraid of what you'll do once you stop doubting yourself. By the time I made my next move, they were comfortable, careless, certain. They still believed I didn't see what was happening. They still believed I wouldn't do anything drastic. They were wrong. But they wouldn't realize that until much later. Until a set of keys changed hands. Until a door opened that shouldn't have. Until a house they thought they still controlled stopped being theirs in every way that mattered. And by then, no amount of "you're overreacting" would save them from reality. People assume big decisions come with big moments. Fights, ultimatums, doors slammed. Mine didn't. The decision to sell the house happened quietly. So quietly that no one noticed, which, in hindsight, was exactly why it worked. There wasn't a final argument. There wasn't a dramatic confrontation. There was just a moment where something inside me stopped trying to explain. It happened late one night. I was sitting alone in the living room, lights off, scrolling through my phone, when I noticed something small. A text thread. Old. Buried. My mother-in-law. We'll just let ourselves in. She won't mind. It's easier this way. Messages I'd ignored at the time. Messages I'd minimized. Messages I'd told myself didn't mean anything. But now, reading them all at once, something clicked. This wasn't carelessness. It was entitlement. They didn't see my house as my house. They saw it as a family resource, a shared asset. A place that existed for convenience. And I realized something else. They weren't confused about boundaries. They simply didn't recognize my authority to set them. That was the night I stopped asking myself how to make them respect me, and started asking myself why they still had access at all. The next morning, I didn't say anything. Not to my husband, not to my in-laws. I just made a call. A realtor. I framed it as curiosity, a question. Nothing serious. What would my house be worth if I decided to sell? The answer surprised me. Not just the number, the ease. There's strong interest in your area, she said. Homes like yours don't stay long. Homes like yours. The phrase stuck, because it reminded me of something I'd slowly forgotten. It was mine. It took 6 weeks from that first call to closing. 6 weeks where I smiled at family dinners while signing documents in parking lots. 6 weeks of nodding, agreeing, staying pleasant, while quietly preparing my exit. Over the next few weeks, I did everything the same on the outside. Family dinners, polite conversations, nods instead of arguments. Inside, I was planning. I met the realtor while everyone thought I was running errands. I signed documents while my phone sat face down on the table. I scheduled showings during hours I knew no one else would be around. Every showing was Tuesday morning. My mother-in-law had a standing appointment then. My sister-in-law was usually still asleep. And the realtor used a lockbox, so I didn't even have to be there. I didn't announce it. I didn't warn anyone. Because this wasn't revenge. It was an exit strategy. The day I told my husband, I expected resistance. Instead, he just looked tired. "I don't blame you," he said after a long pause. "This place has never really been ours." That hurt more than if he'd argued, because it confirmed what I already knew. We weren't living in a home. We were living in a compromise. We agreed not to tell his family right away. "Let's just wait until things are final," he said. I nodded. Waiting had always been their tactic. I decided to use it once. The offers came fast, faster than I expected. One stood out immediately. Clean, cash, flexible timeline. An investor. Someone who didn't need months. Someone who moved decisively. We accepted. The paperwork moved quickly after that. Inspections, signatures, dates. Every step made the house feel lighter. Less like a battlefield, more like a closed chapter. The day we finalized the sale, I walked through each room one last time. I noticed things I'd stopped seeing. The way I always locked the bedroom door out of habit. The way I flinched when someone else's car pulled into the driveway. The way I'd learned to live on alert in a place that was supposed to feel safe. I didn't feel sad. I felt free. We planned the trip right after. A short one, already scheduled. Work-related. Nothing suspicious. I thought about changing the locks immediately. More than once. But that would have raised questions. Suspicion. I needed them comfortable. Unaware. Confident that nothing had changed. One more week wouldn't matter. Or so I thought. "I'll change the locks when we get back," I told myself. I didn't know I wouldn't need to. What I didn't know was that while I was closing doors quietly, someone else was opening one they had no right to touch. My sister-in-law had just had a blowout with her boyfriend. No place to stay. No plan. And my mother-in-law did what she always did when she felt cornered. She made a decision that wasn't hers to make. They still thought they had time. They still thought nothing had changed. They still believed silence meant permission. And when they decided to stop by one last time, they had no idea the house was already gone. They thought they were walking into familiar territory. They were walking into a mistake.
And soon, everyone would see it. The key was never supposed to exist, at least not in her hands. I remembered the moment clearly once everything started to unravel, years earlier during a genuine emergency. A burst pipe, water everywhere. I was out of town. My mother-in-law had insisted, "Just in case," she'd said, "what if something happens again?" I had hesitated. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding the spare key between my fingers, already uncomfortable. "I don't like people having copies," I said. She smiled, soft and reassuring. "I would never use it without asking." That was the deal. That was the condition. At least that's what I thought. What I didn't know then, what I only learned much later, was that one key had turned into two. She'd made a copy, quietly, without asking, without telling me. And once something like that happens, it changes everything. Because the key stops being about emergencies. It becomes about access. For years, she never mentioned it. She didn't need to. She didn't use it often, just enough to normalize it, stopping by real quick, letting herself in just to drop something off, walking through the house like she belonged there. Each time she'd smile and say the same thing, "I didn't want to bother you." And every time I swallowed the discomfort, because confronting it felt petty, because pushing back felt dramatic, because she was family. By the time I realized how much ground I'd lost, the boundary was already gone. The house wasn't a private space anymore. It was a shared assumption. And assumptions, I was learning, are dangerous things. When my sister-in-law started coming around more often, the pattern repeated itself. She never asked. She announced, "I'll stop by later. I'll be there tonight. I'll just use the guest room. Always phrased like plans already approved. And my mother-in-law always backed her up. She knows she's welcome, she'd say. You're family. Family. The word that excused everything. The night before my trip, my phone buzzed with a message from my mother-in-law. I might swing by tomorrow just to check on things while you're gone. Check on things. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. I almost replied. I almost said no. But I didn't. Because saying no would have raised questions, and questions would have led to suspicion, and suspicion would have led to interference. I needed everything calm, predictable, so I typed back the safest response I could think of. Okay. One word. Enough to keep the peace. Enough to keep her comfortable. Enough to let her think nothing had changed. What I didn't know then was that she took that single word and expanded it into permission, not just for herself, but for my sister-in-law. Later, I would piece it together from fragments, a comment she made to a neighbor, something my husband overheard, a sentence my sister-in-law screamed when being pulled toward a police car. She said it was fine. That was her defense. Not a lease, not a message from me, not ownership, just her mother's word. She said we could use it, like a tool, like an object, like it was never someone's home. My mother-in-law didn't just give her the key. She gave her confidence. She told her the house was still under control, that nothing had really changed, that I didn't need to be consulted. And why would she think otherwise? She'd been getting away with it for years. The copy of the key sat on her keychain like it belonged there. Heavy, permanent, a symbol of entitlement she never thought would be challenged. And when my sister-in-law needed a place, desperate, angry, unwilling to ask permission from anyone who might say no, my mother-in-law made a decision, not a careful one, not a legal one, a familiar one. She handed over the key. No call to me, no message, no hesitation, just assumption. And in that moment, she crossed the line that couldn't be uncrossed. Because giving someone access to a house you don't own isn't a misunderstanding, it's a violation. And she did it without a second thought.
By the time I boarded that plane, the key was already in motion. The lock was already turning. The house was already being claimed by someone who had no right to it. They thought they were using something that still belonged to the family. They thought I'd never notice. They thought the silence meant consent. They were wrong. And soon, that small piece of metal would cost them more than they ever imagined. That was the first thing that shocked me when I later understood what happened. She didn't tiptoe, didn't act like someone borrowing a space, didn't behave like a guest who knew she could be asked to leave. She moved in. My sister-in-law treated my house the way someone treats a place they believe already belongs to them. When I started piecing the timeline together, through neighbors, messages, fragments of conversation, it became painfully clear. She arrived with luggage, not a backpack, not an overnight bag, suitcases, multiple. She parked directly in the driveway, used the front door, left the lights on. She didn't even bother closing the blinds. The first night, she ordered takeout, not quietly, not discreetly. Delivery car out front, driver knocking, door opening wide. She laughed loudly enough that a neighbor noticed. That neighbor later told me, "I thought maybe you'd rented the place out." That was how confident she looked, like someone with permission. By the second day, she'd started rearranging things. I know that because one of the neighbors, an older woman who'd lived there longer than anyone, texted me, "Is everything okay at the house?" I stared at the message for a long time before replying. Why? A minute passed. Then, I saw someone moving furniture. Just wanted to check. Furniture. My stomach tightened. She wasn't just staying. She was settling. Later, I learned she'd moved my dining chairs into the garage to make space. She stacked my mail on the counter like it wasn't mine. She unplugged the security camera in the living room because it made her uncomfortable. Uncomfortable. In my own house. But the part that made my hands shake when I heard it wasn't the furniture. It was the way she talked to people. She introduced herself as if ownership was implied. "Oh, I live here now. It's been in the family for years. We're just transitioning some things." Transitioning, as if I were already gone. My mother-in-law stopped by that afternoon, not to stop her, to reinforce it. She told a neighbor, "It's easier this way while things are shifting." Shifting? That word again. Nothing had shifted. The house was sold, the papers were signed, the keys were no longer symbolic. But in her mind, reality lagged behind her authority. And my sister-in-law absorbed that confidence like oxygen. She posted about it. Not directly, but enough. A photo of wine glasses on my kitchen counter. A caption, "Finally breathing again." Another story, "Feet on my coffee table." New chapter. No address tagged, no explanation, just implication. People assumed. They always do. By the third day, she'd invited someone over, a friend. They sat on the porch, laughed, smoked. A neighbor asked if everything was all right. She rolled her eyes. "My sister-in-law is dramatic. She'll get over it." Get over what? I hadn't said anything. I hadn't even landed yet. But in her version of events, I was already the obstacle, the unreasonable one, the person who made things difficult. That narrative had been built long before she stepped through the door. And my mother-in-law fed it. "She knows," she told her. "She just needs time." Time. Another word that excused trespassing. The night before the arrest, my sister-in-law slept in the master bedroom. My bedroom. She didn't ask. She didn't hesitate. She took the biggest room because, in her mind, it made sense. She told my mother-in-law, "I can finally sleep," as if the house had been suffocating her from afar. That night, the neighbor across the street noticed something else. A man pulling up. Not family. Not familiar. He stood on the porch, checked his phone, then tried the door. It didn't open, because my sister-in-law had changed the lock on the inside. Not permanently, just enough. She didn't know she'd crossed into something irreversible. She thought she was protecting her space. When he knocked, she didn't answer. When he rang the bell, she yelled through the door, "Who is it?" The neighbor said the man looked confused, then irritated, then concerned. He showed her something later. Documents. He pointed at the house. The neighbor heard the words clearly, "I'm the owner." That was when the shouting started. My sister-in-law laughed. Actually laughed. "You don't own anything," she said. "This house has been in my family forever." Forever. She called my mother-in-law, panicked now, angry. "They're trying to kick me out, some random guy." My mother-in-law drove over immediately. No call to me, no pause, no doubt. She arrived with authority. She told him there had been a mistake, that paperwork was wrong, that family matters were complicated, that she'd handle it. He didn't argue. He called the police. That's when everything stopped being theoretical. That's when confidence collapsed. That's when neighbors came outside. Phones out, whispers spreading. My sister-in-law screamed when the police arrived. Not fear, outrage. She told them she lived there, that she had permission, that this was harassment. She told them to call her mother. They did, and my mother-in-law stood there, keys in her hand, trying to explain something that couldn't be explained. Because permission from someone who doesn't own the house isn't permission. It's trespassing. And trespassing, once documented, doesn't care about family. By the time I turned my phone off airplane mode,
the story was already moving without me. Neighbors had watched, strangers had listened, authority had arrived, and the house, my house, had finally rejected the lie that had been living inside it. What my mother-in-law still didn't understand was that this wasn't the humiliation. Not yet. This was just the moment the audience arrived, and soon everyone would be watching. By the time the police finished taking statements, the story had already split into two versions, and neither of them belonged to my mother-in-law anymore. She tried to control the narrative the way she always had, by speaking first, louder, with certainty. "This is a family misunderstanding," she kept saying. "There was permission. She's not a stranger. This didn't need to escalate." But escalation had already happened. The police didn't rush. They didn't argue. They listened. And that was the problem, because when people listen, inconsistencies surface. My sister-in-law couldn't keep her story straight. First, she said she lived there. Then she said she was staying temporarily. Then she said she was allowed to use it whenever she needed. Permission shifted depending on the question. The officer asked, "Who gave you permission?" She pointed at my mother-in-law. The officer turned to her. "And do you own the property?" That pause, that half-second of silence was the moment everything tilted. "No," my mother-in-law said, but isn't ownership," the officer replied calmly. Neighbors had gathered by then. Not dramatically, not in a mob, just people standing on their porches, leaning against fences, watching a woman who had always acted like she ran the street suddenly lose her footing. The new owner stood a few steps back, arms crossed, documents in hand. He didn't raise his voice, didn't insult anyone. He just waited. And when the officer asked for proof of ownership, he handed it over. Clean, stamped, final. My sister-in-law's voice went sharp. "This is ridiculous," she said. "We've been using this house for years." "Using it doesn't make it yours," the officer said. My mother-in-law jumped in. "She's family," she insisted. "We didn't think it mattered." "That's the issue," the officer replied. "It does." My sister-in-law started crying then, but not quietly, loud, accusatory. She looked around like the audience would save her. "They can't do this to me," she said. "Everyone knows this is our house." No one stepped forward, because no one could. The neighbor who'd lived across the street for decades shook her head slowly. "I've only ever seen her visit, not live there." Another voice chimed in. "I thought the place was sold." That sentence landed harder than anything else. Sold. My mother-in-law's head snapped toward the speaker. "What do you mean sold?" The new owner spoke then, for the first time since the shouting started. "I closed last month," he said evenly. "Possession transferred last week." Transferred. That word cut through everything. My mother-in-law looked stunned, not confused, betrayed, as if the world had moved without her consent. "You sold it?" she whispered, to no one in particular. My sister-in-law turned toward her. "What do you mean sold?" she demanded. "You said—" My mother-in-law didn't answer, because for the first time, her version of events was being questioned by the very person she'd convinced. The officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said to my sister-in-law, "you were asked to leave. You refused. You claimed ownership you don't have." He paused. "That's why we're here." My sister-in-law's panic turned sharp. "This is her fault," she said suddenly. "She didn't tell us. She set us up." Set them up, from 30,000 feet in the air. The officer looked unimpressed. "That's between you and her. Right now, this is about unlawful entry." My mother-in-law tried again. "She didn't mean any harm," she said quickly. "We can resolve this privately." The officer shook his head. "It's past that." That was when the handcuffs came out. Not aggressively, not dramatically. Procedural. My sister-in-law screamed. Not fear, humiliation. Neighbors watched as she was guided toward the patrol car. Someone pulled out a phone. Another neighbor turned away. The new owner stepped aside. He didn't look triumphant, just relieved. When the door closed behind her, the street felt different. Quieter. Heavier. My mother-in-law stood frozen, keys dangling uselessly from her fingers. For years, keys meant access, control, authority. Now they meant nothing. She asked the officer one last thing. "Can I at least go inside and get her things?" He shook his head. "Not without the owner's permission." Permission. That word again. And suddenly she understood what she'd lost. Not the house. The illusion. The belief that family status overruled reality. When she finally called me, voice shaking, breath uneven, it wasn't to explain. It was to regain control. "You need to come back," she said. "Everyone is confused." Confused wasn't the word. Exposed was. And as she stood there, surrounded by neighbors who now knew the truth, one thing became clear. This wasn't a private family issue anymore. It was a public collapse. And the worst part for her? She didn't even know yet what I was about to do next. The first person my mother-in-law called after the police left wasn't a lawyer. It wasn't the new owner. It wasn't me. It was my husband. I found out later, not because she told me, but because I saw the call log on his phone that night. 17 missed calls, all within 40 minutes. By the time he answered, the story had already been rewritten at least 5 times. She didn't understand, my mother-in-law said. She panicked. They escalated it. She was treated unfairly. Your wife didn't explain things properly. Always the same structure. Something happened, it was unfortunate, and somehow it wasn't her fault. When my husband finally got home that evening, I could tell immediately. He didn't take his shoes off, didn't sit down. He just stood there, keys still in his hand, staring at the wall like he was bracing himself. "She called me," he said. "I know," I replied. "She says your sister didn't know the house was sold." "I know," I said again. He looked at me then, really looked. "She says she thought she still had permission." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't interrupt. I waited, because I knew this moment was coming. "She says this all happened because you didn't tell anyone," he added quietly. There it was. I took a breath. "When was the last time," I asked calmly, "your mother asked permission before doing something with our house?" He opened his mouth. Closed it. I continued. "When did she tell us before giving keys away? When did she ask before letting people stay? When did she ever act like it wasn't hers to manage?" He rubbed his face with one hand. "She didn't mean for this to happen," he said, but the conviction wasn't there. "I know," I replied. "She meant for it to stay quiet." That landed. He sat down slowly. "She's blaming you," he said. "I expected that. What I need to know is whether you are." Silence filled the room. The kind that doesn't feel empty, it feels heavy. "No," he said finally. But he didn't sound relieved. He sounded tired. "She says you set a trap, that you waited for something like this." I met his eyes. "If I wanted to set a trap, do you think I'd be on a plane when it happened?" That was when something shifted. Not dramatically, subtly, like a wall cracking under pressure. "She's scared," he said. "She's saying this could ruin everything." "She's right," I replied. He looked at me sharply. "Not the company, the illusion." He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She never thought it would go this far, he muttered. No, I said. She thought she still controlled the rules. That was when he finally said the thing he'd never admitted out loud. She's done this before, he said quietly. I stayed silent. With smaller things, decisions, boundaries, she'd push, and if no one stopped her, she'd just keep going. I nodded. And no one stopped her, I said. He exhaled. Because it was easier not to. There it was. The truth. I didn't realize how much it was affecting you, he said. I thought if we waited long enough, she'd back off. I almost laughed.
But there was nothing funny about it. Waiting, I said softly, was how she won. He nodded slowly. I see that now. That night his phone rang again. Her name lit up the screen. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he answered. I could hear her voice immediately. Sharp, urgent, panicked. This is getting out of hand, she said. You need to talk to her. She needs to fix this. He didn't raise his voice, didn't argue. He waited until she ran out of breath. Then he said something she wasn't expecting. No. There was a pause on the line. What do you mean, no? She snapped. I mean, he said evenly, you crossed a line, and you don't get to decide how this ends. You're choosing her over your family, she said coldly. I'm choosing reality, he replied. She tried again. This didn't have to be public. You made it public, he replied, when you gave away keys to something you didn't own. Silence. He continued, you don't get to manage our lives anymore. Her voice hardened. So that's it? Yes, that's it. She said one last thing before hanging up. You'll regret this. He ended the call without responding. When he set the phone down, his hands were shaking. Not from fear, from release. She's going to tell everyone her version, he said. I know, I replied. And they're going to call, he added. I know. He looked at me then. What do we do? I thought of the neighbors, the police report, the new owner, the paper trail. We let her talk, I said, and we don't contradict her. He frowned. That doesn't make sense. It will, I replied, because the truth doesn't need managing. That night, for the first time since we'd bought the house, I slept without listening for footsteps, without wondering who might let themselves in, without bracing for intrusion. And somewhere across town, my mother-in-law was doing something she'd never had to do before, trying to explain herself without control, without access, without keys. She didn't know it yet, but the next move she made would cost her far more than the house ever did. By morning, the story had already escaped the family group chats, and once something escapes, it doesn't come back the same. My mother-in-law started early, before breakfast, before anyone could question her. She called relatives first, not to ask how my sister-in-law was doing, but to explain. There was a misunderstanding, an overreaction, a new owner who didn't understand our situation. Always the same framing: confusion, unfairness, bad timing, never responsibility. By mid-morning, messages started coming in, from cousins I barely spoke to, from an aunt I hadn't seen in years. What really happened? Is your sister-in-law okay? This seems extreme. I didn't respond, because I didn't need to. The next move wasn't private. It was public. My sister-in-law posted. I didn't see it at first. A friend sent me the screenshot with no commentary, just the image. It was a selfie taken from inside the police car, her face red, eyes furious, caption in bold white text,
When your own family betrays you and lets strangers steal your home. Below it, paragraphs. She wrote about betrayal, about being thrown out, about how certain people sold their family home behind everyone's back.
She never used my name. She didn't have to. Comments poured in. Angry ones, sympathetic ones, people choosing sides without facts. How could they do this to you? That house has always been yours. Family doesn't treat family like this. I watched it spread quietly. Then something happened she didn't expect. Someone commented who wasn't family. A woman from the neighborhood. "I was there," she wrote. "I watched the police arrive. You were asked to leave. You refused." The replies exploded. My sister-in-law deleted the comment, but it was too late. Screenshots exist longer than lies. Then another comment appeared, from someone she didn't recognize. "I'm part of the renovation crew hired by the new owner. The property was vacant. We had documents." New owner. Plural witnesses. The post was taken down within minutes, but not before enough people saw it, not before enough people started asking questions. My phone buzzed again, not frantic this time, curious. What's going on? Is it true the house was sold? Why did the police get involved? That afternoon, my mother-in-law called. Her tone had changed, not panicked, controlled, measured. "We need to clear this up," she said. "Things are getting distorted." "Distorted? You mean public," I replied. She exhaled slowly. "This didn't need to be shared online." "I didn't share anything," I said. Silence. "She's upset," my mother-in-law continued. "She told her truth." "No," I corrected. "She told a version that falls apart under witnesses." She lowered her voice. "You're enjoying this," she said. I almost smiled. "No," I replied. "I'm letting it happen." Another pause. "People are calling me," she said, "asking questions." That happens when things stop being private. She tried a new tactic. "We can still control this if we speak together, unified." Unified. The word tasted familiar. "Control isn't possible anymore," I said calmly, "and unity built on lies doesn't hold." Her patience cracked. "You sold the house without telling anyone," she said sharply. "You caused this." "No," I replied. "I ended something that was already broken." She hung up. An hour later, a distant relative called my husband, then another, not accusing, clarifying. What really happened? Why did she think she lived there? Why did the police come? For the first time, my mother-in-law wasn't the first voice people heard. She was just one of many. That evening, the post resurfaced, not from my sister-in-law, from someone else. A cropped image, the caption visible, the police car unmistakable, with a new caption added underneath. "This is what entitlement looks like." It wasn't kind, it wasn't fair, it was unstoppable. By the time night fell, the narrative shifted, not dramatically, subtly, from betrayal to boundaries, from family conflict to consequences. My sister-in-law stopped posting. My mother-in-law stopped calling. And somewhere between screenshots and whispered conversations, something irreversible happened. People stopped assuming she was right. They started asking why. And once people ask why, control is already gone. She still thought she could fix this, still believed there was a version of the story that saved her authority. She was wrong. Because the next confrontation wouldn't happen online, it would happen face-to-face, with proof, with witnesses, and with no room left to spin the truth. The meeting wasn't scheduled. That was the first thing that made my mother-in-law uneasy. She thought confrontations happened on her terms, over dinner tables, through phone calls, behind closed doors.
Not like this. The new owner asked to meet in person, not at the house, at his attorney's office. Neutral ground, witnesses present, paper everywhere. My husband and I arrived together. She was already there when we walked in, sitting straight-backed, arms crossed, eyes sharp. She didn't stand when she saw me. She didn't greet me. She looked past me, as if refusing to acknowledge me would restore some invisible hierarchy. The attorney greeted us calmly, professional, polite. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "We just want to clarify a few things." Clarify. That word again. My mother-in-law smiled tightly. "There's been a lot of confusion," she said, before anyone else could speak. "We're hoping to resolve this quietly." Quietly. The attorney nodded. "That depends," he replied, "on what needs resolving." He turned to my husband. "You're listed as next of kin, but not as an owner. Is that correct?" "Yes," my husband said. The attorney nodded again and turned to me. "And you are the former owner," he said. "Yes," I replied. My mother-in-law's jaw tightened. "Former," she repeated. "That's exactly the problem. No one told us." The attorney didn't look at her. Notification isn't required. Consent isn't either. She leaned forward. "She allowed us access," she said, "for years." Allowed. I spoke for the first time. "You had access," I said calmly, "not ownership. And access was never permanent." She snapped her head toward me. "You never said that." "I didn't have to," I replied. The attorney slid a folder across the table. "This is the deed transfer, dated and recorded." Another document followed. "And this is the police report. It notes refusal to vacate and a false claim of residency." False claim. My sister-in-law wasn't there, but her words were. Documented. My mother-in-law scoffed. "She was emotional," she said. "She didn't understand." "She understood enough to refuse to leave," the attorney replied. Silence fell. Not awkward, heavy. Then my mother-in-law tried one last move. "This is a family matter," she said, voice controlled. Dragging outsiders into it was unnecessary. The attorney smiled faintly. "The moment the police were called, this stopped being family business." He turned to me. "Do you want to add anything?" I did. "I want to be clear," I said. "No one had permission to be in that house after the sale." My mother-in-law opened her mouth. I didn't stop. "I also wanted on record that boundaries were ignored long before the sale." The attorney flipped through them slowly. My mother-in-law stared. Those messages, the casual entitlement, the assumptions, the "we'll just let ourselves in," they weren't emotional. They were factual. She stood abruptly. "This is an ambush," she said. "No," the attorney replied. "It's documentation." She looked at my husband. "You're really letting this happen?" He didn't hesitate. "Yes," he said. That word landed harder than any accusation. Her composure cracked. Not loudly, precisely. She sat back down. For the first time since I'd known her, she looked small. Not weak, just ordinary. The attorney closed the folder. "Here's what happens next," he said. "No further contact, no access attempts. Any violation will be treated as trespassing." He looked directly at her. "Do you understand?" She nodded. Once. Stiff. We stood to leave. She didn't look at me. She didn't need to. Everything she'd tried to control, the house, the narrative, the family, it was gone. As we walked out, my husband squeezed my hand, not apologetically, decisively, and I realized something as the door closed behind us. This wasn't revenge. It was closure. And the consequences? They were only just beginning. The fallout didn't come all at once.
It came in pauses, in conversations that stopped when she entered the room, in invitations that didn't arrive, in people who suddenly forgot to return calls. At first, my mother-in-law pretended nothing had changed. She still showed up where she always had, still smiled the same tight smile, still spoke with the same authority. But something was different. People weren't listening the way they used to. At church, she sat in her usual pew. No one moved to join her. At family gatherings, conversations shifted the moment she approached. Not dramatically, not rudely, just away. She wasn't confronted. She was avoided. That was worse, because confrontation gives you something to push against. Silence doesn't. My sister-in-law tried to re-enter the narrative first. She showed up at a cousin's barbecue unannounced, loud, defiant, acting like nothing had happened. "I don't know why everyone's acting weird," she said, laughing too hard. "People really believe anything they hear." Someone asked, carefully, "Didn't the police arrest you?" The laughter stopped. She snapped back with half answers. "Temporary misunderstanding. They overreacted. It'll all be cleared up." No one argued. They didn't need to, because by then the story had reached people who weren't emotionally invested. Neighbors, friends of friends, people who had seen the police far. Facts travel faster than excuses. My mother-in-law tried to regain control quietly. She hosted a dinner. Only 3 people came. She blamed scheduling conflicts. Then she tried something else. She sent messages. Long ones, carefully worded, explaining her side, clarifying intentions, emphasizing family. Most went unanswered. Not blocked, just unread. My husband's phone rang one night. An aunt. "She's not doing well," she said. "She feels misunderstood." He listened, then asked one question. "Did she give away keys to a house she didn't own?" Silence. "That's what people are reacting to," he said calmly. The aunt didn't argue, because she couldn't. The hardest hit wasn't the whispers. It was the loss of authority. She used to be the one people deferred to, asked advice from, trusted. Now, when she spoke, people checked details, asked follow-up questions, verified. She noticed. Of course she did. Control slipping is loud to the person losing it. She called me once more, not angry, not pleading, measured. "People are treating me differently," she said. "Yes," I replied. "This isn't fair," she added. "One incident shouldn't erase everything I've done." "It doesn't erase it, it contextualizes it." She didn't like that word. "You're enjoying this," she accused quietly. "No," I said. "I'm watching it." She exhaled sharply. "You could help me," she said. "You could clarify things." "I already have," I replied, "by not lying." She hung up without saying goodbye. That was the last time she called me directly. My sister-in-law disappeared from family events entirely. Some people said she was embarrassed. Others said she was angry. Both were probably true. The house, the one she thought she could claim, was already changing. The new owner sent us a photo. Walls down, floors stripped, locks replaced. Nothing recognizable left. My husband stared at it longer than I expected. "It really is over," he said. "Yes," I replied, and for the first time he smiled, not because of revenge, because of relief. That night I realized something important. The punishment wasn't the arrest, or the confrontation, or the documents. It was irrelevance. My mother-in-law had spent years positioning herself at the center of everything. Now things moved without her. Decisions happened without her consulting. Stories existed without her version. She wasn't hated. She was excluded.
and exclusion is the quiet consequence no one prepares for. She still believed this could be fixed, that there was one conversation left, one explanation, one last pull. She was wrong, because the next chapter wouldn't be about what she lost, it would be about what we chose. She waited longer than I expected, long enough to believe maybe she wouldn't try again. That was my mistake. She didn't come to me, she went to him. It happened on a Sunday afternoon, no warning, no call, just a knock at the door. When my husband opened it, she was already halfway inside. "I just need 5 minutes," she said, stepping past him like the house still answered to her presence. I stayed where I was, watching. She didn't look at me. She never did when she wanted control. She sat down at the table and folded her hands neatly. "I'm not here to argue. I'm here to fix this." Fix. That word had done a lot of damage already. "You humiliated your sister," she continued, turning to my husband, "and you let it happen." He didn't respond. She leaned forward. "People are talking. They think things that aren't true." "Which things?" he asked calmly. She hesitated. "That I overstepped, that I gave keys away without permission." "Did you?" he asked. Silence. "I was trying to help," she said. "That house was sitting empty." "It wasn't yours," he replied. Her jaw tightened. "This is exactly what I mean," she snapped. "You've changed." "No," he said. "I stopped pretending." She turned to me then, eyes sharp. "You could have stopped this," she said. "You chose not to." "I didn't cause it. I didn't cover it." She laughed once, bitter. "You think this ends well for you?" she asked. "Families don't forget things like this." "Neither do we." She stood, suddenly emotional, not loud, strategic. "I gave everything to this family," she said to my husband, "and now I'm being punished for one mistake." "One pattern," he corrected. She froze. "What?" "You didn't make one mistake. You crossed the same line over and over, and we let you." Her voice softened. "So you're choosing her," she said. He didn't hesitate. "Yes." The word landed like a door closing. She stared at him. "You'll regret this," she said quietly. "Maybe, but not for this reason." She grabbed her purse. "I won't forget this," she said. "I know," he replied. "That's why this ends now." She looked around once more, at the walls, the furniture, the space she no longer had access to. Then she left. No apology, no resolution, just loss. When the door closed, my husband leaned back against it and exhaled. "I should have done this years ago," he said. I nodded. "But you didn't," I replied. "You did it now." He looked at me. "We're done," he said. "No keys, no access, no explanations." That night, he blocked her number, and for the first time, the silence felt clean, not tense, not fragile, final. She never came back, not because she didn't want to, but because she couldn't. The next chapter wouldn't be about confrontation, it would be about rebuilding, without her shadow, without permission, without fear. The new house didn't feel like a replacement, it felt like a reset. No spare keys floating around, no just stopping by, no assumptions disguised as concern. When we moved in, the first thing we did wasn't unpack, it was change the locks. All of them. Not out of fear, out of intention. The space was smaller than the old house, fewer rooms, fewer memories attached to other people's expectations. The walls were bare, the floors still smelled faintly of fresh paint, and the silence felt earned. That first night, we ate on the floor. Paper plates, takeout containers, no table yet. My husband looked around and laughed softly. "No one's gonna show up," he said. It wasn't a joke, it was relief. Weeks passed, then months. No surprise visits, no calls demanding explanations, no keys mysteriously appearing in someone else's hand. The family dynamic changed overnight. Not loudly, socially. Invitations slowed, conversations became polite, distant. People stopped asking me to be understanding, stopped asking him to fix things. They had watched what happened. They understood consequences now. My sister-in-law never spoke to me again. I heard through someone else that she told people it was a misunderstanding, that she thought she had permission, that she was embarrassed. I didn't correct the story. I didn't need to. The truth had already been witnessed. As for my mother-in-law, she tried once more, a message, weeks later, carefully worded, neutral tone. "I think we should put this behind us." I read it, then deleted it. Not blocked, deleted. Some things don't need a response to be final. The strangest part wasn't losing her presence. It was realizing how much space she had taken up without me noticing, how often I had measured my choices against her reactions, how quiet my own instincts had been, until they weren't. One evening, months later, I stood in our kitchen watching the sunset through a window that no one else had ever looked through and claimed. I thought about the house, the keys, the police car, the missed calls, and I realized something that made me smile. The most powerful moment in this story wasn't the arrest, it wasn't the confrontation, it wasn't even the sale. It was the moment I stopped explaining myself, because the house was never really the point. Control was. And once I let go of the need to justify my boundaries, everything else followed. She thought she lost access to a building. What she really lost was leverage, and I didn't gain revenge. I gained peace, which, it turns out, lasts a lot longer. Comment below what you think about this story. Don't forget to subscribe and check out the other stories appearing on your screen now.